Hi, thanks very much for having me here. It's great to be back in Portland. I was here only once in my life before now, and that was probably about 10 or so years ago. It was just after, not long after, you just had the first segment of the Max operating, and so I'm actually looking forward to tomorrow to riding around on the light rail system to see the parts that have evolved since I was last here. I grew up in Chicago, and my primary objective in life, when I was in grade school even, because I grew up in a family that didn't have an automobile. Okay, so what did I want to do? I wanted to drive trains. I wanted to drive the elevated trains in Chicago. So I went to a technical high school. I mean, I even took typing class, and I dropped typing class. I was having trouble keeping up with the rest of the class. I figured I'm never going to need to know how to type. You know, I want to drive trains. So when I got out of high school, they weren't hiring at the Transit Authority. So I went on to a city college a couple of years. Still weren't hiring. So I went on and got my 4-year degree in geography from DePaul University. Still weren't hiring. So I went and got the Master's of Urban Planning degree down in Urbana-Champaign at University of Illinois. Went back to the transit. Still weren't hiring. So I finished the PhD. I went and I was a faculty member for 9 years at MIT in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. And was recruited back a couple of years ago, back to Chicago, by the president of the Transit Authority and by a dean at University of Illinois. And I figure if I totally screw up at my current job, I might actually achieve my life's ambition and drive trains for the rest of my life. Anyway, that said, I actually do drive trains once a week on Mondays. I'm going through training and that. So anyway, but that's besides the point. We don't want to get off track. Okay, anyway. So, the title of the talk is Leveraging Technology to Reshape Planning at the Chicago Transit Authority. And by the way, I have a few copies of the slides, probably not enough for this crowd. There's about 20 copies. I have an extra master set here that I can give to one of the faculty folks here who can make some extra copies as well. And just so in case you're more interested in the information that's going to be conveyed in this talk, a lot of it can be found in the book called Planning Support Systems. It comes from ESRI Press in conjunction with the CUPR Press at Rutgers. And there's a chapter in there called Spatial Multimedia for Planning Support, where a lot of the examples that you see here are reflected in that. Anyway, all right, so let's tell you a little bit about the Chicago Transit Authority. CTA, by the way, what time does this finish up? 1:30. Okay, great. CTA runs about 2,000 buses on about 2,273 route miles. We have 143 bus routes. We also have a rail system. We run buses and we run elevated trains. The elevated trains are sometimes elevated, sometimes in subway, sometimes in the median of a highway, and sometimes on grade level. So anyway, our elevated trains, we call them the L though, just for short. Those consist of about 1,190 rail cars running on 222 route miles. We have 144 rail stations. We carry about 1.5 million riders a day. 1 million of those customers are on the buses. Okay, so we carry 1 million people a day on the bus system in Chicago and 500,000 on the rail system. We have a $924 million operating budget, annual operating budget, and last time I checked, about a $400 million capital budget. So we're about a $1.3 billion company, if you will. And we have 12,000 employees. So it's a fairly sizable transit authority. It's the second largest transit authority in the country. And this is our route map here. I won't go into a detailed description of the routes. We'll take a look at some of them. But suffice it to say, if I zoomed in a little bit, here's the downtown area, or what we call the loop. And the rail system are the thicker colored lines there, and the buses are the thin lines. Those aren't streets, those are actual bus lines. We have a couple of sister agencies as well in the region around Chicago. One sister agency is called PACE. They operate buses exclusively in the suburbs, but not entirely exclusively, because they actually overlap with some of our services in the outskirts of the city. As we overlap with their services, we serve 40 suburbs as well as the city of Chicago. So PACE operates some suburban buses. They have a challenge of serving a much more sparsely populated region, if you will. That is, their fare recovery is far more challenging because they're serving, I wouldn't say it's sparsely populated, but let's put it this way, the level of density is much lower. We don't have an urban growth boundary. So anyway, so that's PACE. And then Metra is a commuter rail operation. They basically consist of diesel-hauled double-deck trains, and their market are people who come in from the far-flung suburbs and commute downtown. And it's a very predictable market. Everybody wants to get downtown before 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and everybody wants to leave between 4 and 6 p.m., generally speaking. There is some reverse commuting on Metra, an increasing amount of reverse commuting on the commuter rail now, but by and large, it's a commuter type of operation. And the reason why these three agencies are separate is because we serve three very different constituencies in the region. And that's a very important part of this, too. This is going to be technology talk, but also it's worth bringing up. There's politics involved also. Chicago's, the CTA's constituency, that is my constituency, is by and large the city itself and the closest in 40 suburbs. So because of that, and because we have a very diverse population in Chicago, economically speaking, we have to be mindful of the fact that, for instance, we offer a flat fare. We do not graduate our fare based on distance traveled. And there's a variety of political reasons why that's the case. You might have somebody who needs to get to a job who, because of their economic conditions, puts them in a suburb that's farther away from the central business district than some of the closer in suburbs where you have higher levels of income, and it wouldn't be fair to make them pay more. On the other hand, what Metra does, because they're serving suburbs and their constituency is fairly... It's far more predictable, a little less diverse. It's easier for them to work on a pay-by-distance model. PACE also offers a flat fare, but again, they're dealing with a much different kind of market. So the CTA, PACE, and Metra, those are the three operating authorities in Chicago, and then there's a regional transportation authority that simply collects tax and distributes that money amongst the agencies. But by and large, the agencies do their own planning. They do our own operations planning, and we also operate our own vehicles and so forth. So that's in a sense, in a nutshell, the structure, if you will, an overview of the structure of transit in Chicago. And a little bit on the political side, we have a board. The Chicago Transit Authority has a board which is very different, again, different makeup, different political makeup than, say, the board of the commuter rail system or the suburban bus system. Our board is 3 of our board members are appointed by the governor of Illinois, 4 are appointed by the mayor, so the mayor of Chicago, in effect, controls to a large extent how the board is made up. And that's something that's just notable to a certain extent, again, for a variety of reasons. Okay, so what are some of the challenges that we've been dealing with, and what are some of the opportunities that have also befallen us of late? A lot of these opportunities and challenges that we're facing in Chicago are really, some of them are very significant in terms of their similarity to what you face in Portland or anywhere that you might come from. And I can imagine that a lot of you, how many of you are from Portland? Let's see, okay, a few. And as with typical university crowds, how many of you are from the West Coast? Okay, how many of you are from other parts of the U.S., not the West Coast? And how many of you are international? Okay, so we have a very geographically diverse crowd here, which is what we expect in a university environment. So one of the things that, and again, I'll just speak. Anybody here from Chicago, by the way? Okay, all right. I am. Well, anyway, okay. All right, so what we're facing is not unlike what they're facing in other parts of the United States or North America as well, in that, and in fact in other parts of the world. A lot of transit agencies around the world are facing the initial issue, which is the fact that we have changing customer habits. That is, and we're missing just the right edge of the slide, but that's all right. You're not missing much there. That is, more of our customers are with us by choice. That is, more people own cars now in Chicago. A higher percentage of our customers, about 70% of our customers, actually are with us because they choose to be with us. They have a car as an alternative to get to work, but they choose to ride transit. And that's very important. Because you have a much higher percentage of people driving automobiles, you have to work that much harder to retain those customers. Okay, and that's a very poignant challenge for a transit authority. You have to work very hard to retain those customers, which means you have to provide a better product. And that's clearly something that's here in Portland as in other areas. Also, in Chicago, we have had very significant shifting land use and development patterns. Don't worry about the edge of the slide. There's really nothing significant on the edge, by the way. Just a little note to the back of the room there. That is, for example, if I were to bring up a map of where we've had population change in Chicago, you can see that the red areas represent areas of population growth. The blue areas represent areas of population decline, 1990 to 2000 census. And so you can see that there's a lot of dynamics in the way the population is shifting around Chicago. And there's a lot of dynamics also with respect to just the way that happens. Some of the areas that have lost significant population have only lost it because they're tearing down high-rise public housing, but they're replacing that high-rise public housing with other kinds of developments. And so you might see a downward trend in population in a neighborhood, but that's just an anomaly because it's going to bump back up in the next 10-year census. So the point is, you have to be very mindful of the fact that these land use patterns, the development patterns, have changed very appreciably in Chicago. The near west side of the city, for example, used to be a manufacturing district. Then it turned into something akin to Skid Row, if you will, a place where folks who were down and out, and it fell into some significant decay. And then in the last 10, 15 years, it's really boomed back with a lot of development, loft development, $500,000 two-bedroom condos, and so forth. And so that just gives you a sense, a snapshot of the kind of dynamics that we're dealing with. And because of that, it means that a lot of our traffic generators, okay, the places where people want to get on and off our trains and buses, are shifting around the city as well. And we need to be agile enough to be able to adapt to that. So that's one of the challenges that we face. A challenge that we face that not every city faces, at least not with your rail system yet, is an aging infrastructure. Much of our rail system was built 100 years ago. Our elevated lines were actually opened 100 years ago. They were originally pulled with steam engines, and then they electrified them. And as such, a lot of that 100-year-old structure, elevated structure, really needs to be rebuilt. And that's part of why we have a $400 million capital budget, because we're rebuilding some of our lines very significantly. And we have to be able to work with that infrastructure very effectively. And we have to work on trying to leverage all we can get out of that infrastructure, and that's important. There are pieces of bus infrastructure that are germane to our discussion as well. A lot of our turnarounds, for example, where we turn the buses around, have been there for 100 years also, because initially they were pulling horse cars. Well, they didn't have the turnarounds for the horse cars, but in later years, especially when we went to single-ended streetcars back in the 1930s and late 20s, then again, that's when the turnarounds came into being, and you still have the same places where we turn our buses around. Well, where they turned around the streetcar 50 years ago, or 75 years ago for that matter, doesn't necessarily mean that that's that's the best place to turn around the bus today. In fact, there might be a shopping center a half mile down the road that makes a lot more sense to turn the bus in. And so one of the things we've been trying to do is work with that and do our service planning to better match, again, traffic generators as they've shifted. In any case, we do have an aging infrastructure, and so we have some significant facilities issues that we're dealing with when we rebuild that infrastructure. And of course, there's other significant externalities that we face in this day and age, as every transit authority in every major city in the world is facing with the new world we live in. You have to be mindful of safety, security, economics, and other things that really impact the way you do your business. A couple things that are worth noting when we look at these images here. One is, this one kind of illustrates the fact that we are in direct competition with the automobile. Sometimes this works to our advantage, sometimes to our disadvantage. When somebody is standing on one of our platforms on the expressway and you're waiting 5-10 minutes for a train, if that train is delayed, you're standing there watching people go by at 55 miles an hour on the road, and where do you want to be? You want to be in one of those cars. And that's a concern that we have. And sometimes these platforms aren't the very most pleasant places to stand in the Chicago winter. Okay, and so that's an issue. On the other hand, sometimes it's very nice to be on the train when you're going past these cars. You're going 55, 60, 70 miles an hour past cars that are stopped in a traffic jam, and that happens more often than not. And so that can work to our advantage. The poignant piece here is there's an interesting lesson in capacity, in highway capacity and transit capacity. Because when you look at the corridor and the capacity of the corridor, and you consider the fact that one train carries 1,000 people, okay, and you can run those trains at headways or distances between trains of every 3 minutes or so, and on some lines we run 90-second headways, then you see that there's a significant amount of capacity carried here that you don't see here, but sometimes folks in policy arenas don't see that capacity difference. And so that's something that's worth mentioning. Another thing that's worth mentioning is a lot of our rail lines are at or near capacity already in terms of our boarding. As I mentioned, because we have such an old infrastructure, okay, it was built to handle numbers of people that were different than what we currently handle. Furthermore, we have to adapt our vehicles to modern signaling constraints. That is, years ago, we used to run trains without any signals in the 1930s, 1940s, and so forth. And so, you'd be right behind the train in front of you. Well, now, because, you want to maintain a very safe operation, you have signaling that spaces the trains a little further than they might have been in the heyday of the old elevated lines. So that lowers, to a certain extent, the amount of capacity you can carry on the elevated lines. Furthermore, we have to adapt to the Americans with Disabilities Act and make any station that we do a significant amount of work on accessible. And that means platforms like this, which is one of our busiest platforms where we have two major lines intersecting, have to go because they have to be made much wider and you have to accommodate elevators and so forth. And so I don't want to minimize the infrastructure issues. So because of those issues, a lot of our rail lines are at or beyond capacity. On the other side of the coin, a lot of our bus lines are below capacity and losing customers, especially the bus lines that do not serve the central business district. And the reason why is because it costs a lot of money to park in the central business district, but the rest of the city, it has to a large extent free parking, and so you have to work that much harder to really be able to retain customers on crosstown routes, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Okay, so anyway, I'm just setting the stage, if you will, for what are the ways we address some of these challenges in planning at the Chicago Transit Authority, and how do we deal with this. Now, I came over to the Planning Division at CTA a little more than a year and a half ago, and in our corner of the agency, we have over 90 planners, engineers, architects, and other transit professionals working in 5 departments. The departments range in terms of the amount of foresight, if you will, the amount of time that you're planning, from strategic planning that looks 20 to 30 years out into the future. That's where we come up with the grand plans for where to extend our rail lines, for example. And there's a lot of pressure to extend our rail system, which is good. We like that. We also have to expand the core carrying capacity of our rail system. And so strategic planning looks into some of those issues. That's where we're working with the state government, the federal government on reauthorization issues with respect to the Transportation Efficiency Act and so forth. Okay? Facilities planning looks a few years into the future, maybe 5 to 10 years into the future. So where we have rail lines that are currently being rebuilt, our facilities planning department actually has architects and engineers who make sure that the designs that are being put forth by the capital projects people are actually going to work from a passenger flow perspective, and we also work to make sure that those facilities are working well in the construction staging and so forth. So, and they also look at things like, where do you put the bus shelters, for example, or can you consolidate any of the bus turnarounds and things like that. Those are the kinds of issues that our facilities planning people deal with. Service planning deals with a few months into the future, maybe 6 months to 9 months into the future, and sometimes as few as 3 months into the future. When we're doing service planning, largely we're dealing with the bus side of the business. That is, again, how can we connect the buses to major traffic generators? That's what the folks in service planning do. And that is not an easy task, because when you're dealing not only with the bus lines, you're also dealing with 50 aldermen in Chicago, okay? Those are 50 neighborhoods, and in addition to that, you have about 40 suburbs, near-in suburbs that you're dealing with. There's a lot of political pressure to extend the bus line here or not cut this there and so forth, and we try to take a regional approach to bus route restructuring so that, yes, you might have to take away from an unproductive segment, but you want to also add service to areas where that growth can happen, and you want to be able to do that not at the expense of one neighborhood over another. And so it becomes a very delicate process that's not a simple matter of looking at the data on the screen, but also working with a lot of personalities. So that's service planning. And then finally, scheduling, sometimes that's more immediate planning. We change our schedules 4 times a year to match the different riding patterns at different times of the year. So for example, in the winter time, we have very different riding patterns than in the summertime in Chicago, because we have very different seasons. People are less likely to go to the park or the lakefront in the middle of winter. On the other hand, the summer is very pleasant in Chicago. You should come sometime during the 2 weeks we have it. Just kidding. No, we actually have a more significant summer than that. But it's people do go to the lakefront, they go to beaches and so forth, and so we extend the buses to the beaches in the summertime. We pull them back and we serve the schools in the fall and through the winter, and so the schools, the number of kids in schools and high schools and so forth is very significant. It's a significant part of our ridership, enough of one that we actually adjust the schedules accordingly to match the school year. And so because of that, our schedules change 4 times a year. And they're not the same year to year either, because again, there's different travel patterns that change. And sometimes we have to do schedules more immediate than that. Recently there was a water main break that closed a major arterial on the north side of the city, and we had to write special schedules to get around that, and we often do that as well. So there's sometimes very immediate planning that takes place. Then finally, there's a new department that I created which took techies out of these 4 areas and put them together, and that's called data services. That's where we try to gather the folks that are interested in GIS, passenger counters, and other technologies, so that we can have a viable way to feed these other areas. So that's the planning division at the Chicago Transit Authority, and that planning division used to have some challenges. It used to be where, well, of course, they had a staffing shortage initially. We took care of that. They had disparate technological resources, a perception of decisions based on circumstance. That's a polite way of saying that there was a perception that this was politically motivated, and it is to a limited extent, but not entirely. And there was also a perception that we were reacting to issues rather than doing actual proactive planning. We've turned that around, however, in the last couple years. We've developed the human capital in the city. We have, in the planning division alone at CTA, we have recent grads from MIT, Harvard, Berkeley, Stanford, UCLA, University of Illinois, University of Chicago, Northwestern, I don't have any recent Portland State grads as far as I know, but we're always looking. But the point is that, 10 years ago, when you were dealing with declining ridership, rising fares, lowering service standards, and so forth, it would be very hard to attract people to a transit authority like that. And now we're actually attracting a lot of folks from a lot of areas of the country, which is kind of a neat thing. The other thing that's neat about it is we pull in people from other parts of the agency who are veterans. Friends of mine who I've known for 30 plus years who are train fanatics and transit fanatics like I was when I was a kid growing up, went straight to work for the Transit Authority. They had better luck at getting that job than I did. And some of them are working directly for us now, and we've pulled them from other operating ranks. And those folks are very valuable to the operation. You have to be able to pepper the folks who are coming in with fresh ideas with veterans who kind of have tried a lot of these ideas in the past. So anyway, developed human capital. We've consolidated the technological resources, which I just mentioned a little earlier. We're trying to systematize our approach to problem solving. What that means is basing decisions on data, okay, and using tools to help influence those decisions. And part and parcel of that is really developing a viable information infrastructure. We're a few steps behind TriMet here in Portland in terms of the development of that infrastructure, but we're working hard to get to that level, to the level of sophistication here. And part of that infrastructure is, of course, knowing where people live, where they work, what their travel patterns are, and what facilities you need to really serve them. So in that respect, there's a variety of data types that you need to pull together. As I mentioned a little earlier, and as I showed you, you want to know, of course, where people live. So you want to get a sense of what the population density is in the region. And this is a map that we routinely bring in. I'm running Acrobat here. It's a simple map, but it's useful because we can rapidly access it during meetings, and we often do. We bring this map up, we throw it on the wall, we zoom in, zoom out when we're dealing with various folks to talk through issues with respect to different routes. You also want to know where the population is changing, where people are working, and things like that. So that's all very important. Not to mention, of course, the value of knowing your existing infrastructure, which can be very useful indeed. So getting a handle on that type of data is helpful. Also, we have aerial ortho photos, which I'll show you in a few minutes, which are very helpful with some of the physical planning we do. We have schedule information. We have an automated scheduling system called Hastus, which we're using. We are working to improve the level of intelligence of our vehicles. Our vehicles are there. They're kind of like they're moving right along, but we're trying to improve that, and that's an ongoing project. Right now, we have vehicles that know where they are, but unfortunately, our centralized system only wants to know where they are when they're in trouble. And I would rather know where they are at all times because we can use that data as viably as TriMet does here. And so we're working on moving in that direction very aggressively through the deployment of automatic passenger counters and that kind of thing. We're also working on developing other data streams such as performance information, ridership data, specialized models, and we collect data in the field also. We use things like specialized models to, for instance, help us puzzle over questions regarding, for example, the capacity of our elevated lines to handle new routing schemes. And so we have a model that's currently being developed that's going to enable us to play out different scenarios with our rail system as we evolve that rail system. We also have other specialized models that help us understand what changes to fare policy are likely to do to ridership. And that's not necessarily something that we're dealing with right now, but it's always something that you like to have a sense of. And we have other tools as well, like GIS. For example, one of the things we're doing is we have, in some areas of the city, bus stops every 16th of a mile, okay? The bus is stopping literally. Just as soon as it starts, it stops again and picks somebody else up. And that really slows operations. And so, for example, one simple GIS exercise that we've undertaken is looking at the city of Chicago, looking at, in this case, the wards of the city where those 50 aldermen have their areas, looking at a specific ward, ward by ward, looking at the bus stops in that ward, and those bus stops that are more frequent or more closely spaced than others, and we work with the aldermen, with community groups to say, hey, does it make sense to remove this, or is there some reason for that stop to be there, like a senior citizen home or something like that, in which case you want that stop to remain. On the other hand, maybe that stop was put there because of land use that doesn't currently exist. And so that's a way to try to target stops for removal and improve the speed of operation. So that's one way we use that infrastructure. But one of the more interesting things, and one of the things that I've been involved with as an academic for a long time, is a way to augment the infrastructure that we all oftentimes deal with in the transportation industry. And that is through the use of annotation tools, navigational aids, and representational aids. What does that mean? Well, basically, when you get together to talk about a region or the future of a region, you'll oftentimes try to recollect what had happened in the past, describe present conditions, or speculate about the future. And that's where annotation can help you recollect the past. So navigation can help you describe the present, and representational aids can help you speculate about the future in a sense. Annotation has been around for a long time. As long as people were drawing with sticks in sand to describe, hunt buffalo over there beyond hills, you've had spatial annotation, okay? It's been around for a while, and spatial annotation tools, especially those tools that we've augmented with computers, have been around for a while as well. What I'm going to show here in this upper video is Rantoul, Illinois. This is Rantoul, Illinois about 14 years ago when I was a PhD student at Urbana. I was experimenting with spatial annotation with these systems projected on the wall where you could add value to a map. The next thing we're going to go to is about 11 and a half years ago. This is the National Capital Planning Commission in Washington, D.C. And here again, they are experimenting with annotation about 11 or so years ago, 11 and a half years ago. So that's just to say that these tools have been around for a while. What do I mean by annotation? Let me show you. We'll bring up this map again. And, it's interesting. It used to be, when I first came to the Transit Authority, I would come into our service planning meetings, and I'd have a staff, about 10 people sitting around a table, all buried behind the route maps. It looked kind of like nobody was talking to each other, right? Everybody was buried behind their maps. It was like a dysfunctional family at breakfast time, hiding behind the paper. And instead, what we said was, let's put this on the wall and talk to each other. And furthermore, let's be able to augment this. So if we're dealing with some issues, some traffic engineering issues or routing issues in a specific area, we can send somebody out with the digital camera, grab images, and then link those images to the map. So in this case here, you can do that with Acrobat fairly easily. With Acrobat and with QuickTime, you can start to tie some of these things together fairly effectively, and that's nice. And then those annotations can stick to the map, as you can see here. You can zoom in, of course, and see that site more closely, and then you can navigate within these as well. So this is, you can see that the Kentucky Fried Chicken is under new management there, so you better get that new bus going. The point is, and this is just a simple panoramic image that any real estate agent really worth their salt has mastered this technology. It's a fun technology. It's an inexpensive technology. All it simply is a matter of is going out with your digital camera, doing snap, 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 and then pasting the images together like they would be if you were taking images of the Grand Canyon and pasting them on your refrigerator. You put them together. And that's very helpful because oftentimes you want to know what the context is of a specific place. The point is, the Transit Authority did not have those skills in-house when we came in, and in fact we have a very symbiotic relationship with the university environment. We have an internship program where the interns of course learn about best practices in in transportation from our staff, but in turn, the staff learn about new tools and techniques from the interns. And so that's what happened. The interns actually ran a class for the staff in the planning department on how to do these panos, for example. And those are the kinds of things we're doing to really energize and re-energize planning at the Chicago Transit Authority. And that's an example of annotation. So, and annotation's been around for a while. There's been other tools as well that have been used. Navigational aids are designed really to get people who might be working in disparate areas on the same page. When you're talking about building something new, you want to get a handle on what the current conditions are in that location. Here we are visiting San Juan, Puerto Rico. Anybody here from San Juan? Okay, so if I mispronounce something, nobody will notice it, unless those of you at home do. Anyway, all right, so, sorry, every once in a while I forget that we're doing the webcast thing. Anyway, okay, so here in this case, you can take a look at, this was back when I was at MIT. We were doing a collaboration with the Puerto Rico Highway and Transportation Authority and MIT, and some of my students, including Alex Kavanaugh, who developed this, who's now working for us at the Chicago Transit Authority, developed these tools to help get a sense of what the construction progress was of the Tren Urbano. By the way, for those of you who don't know, the Tren Urbano is a new heavy rail rapid transit line that's going up in the greater San Juan area. And so here you can take a look at the imagery, such as the ortho images of a specific segment of track. You can also fly that with a helicopter and see how construction has progressed, or see it 6 months later and compare the two, so you can see kind of how things are going along there. And you can select a specific location and bring up construction photos, and again you can see how construction is progressing through the months at that location, or in fact take another look at, in this case, an image. You can grab the corner of the stadium and turn it around and zoom in and things like that. Okay, using the same technology I was talking about with the with the other Kentucky Fried Chicken example we saw, but only in this case, instead of turning around, you're flying around. Anyway, the point is, we're actually using this kind of technology at the Transit Authority. Unfortunately, I can't show that to you. We're using a proprietary system there. But the point is, these types of technologies are very helpful in trying to maintain and keep a handle on capital construction projects. And where they get even more sophisticated than the flashiness of the imagery is the fact that they can also store AutoCAD files and engineering-related drawings that people can mark up and so forth, and you can have online, and it really helps facilitate the construction progress. So that's a very important piece of the puzzle, and that's an example of what we call a navigational aid. Another example of one gets back to this map here. One thing we have is also the track maps for our rail system. And as I mentioned, we have a $400+ million capital budget. A lot of that is going to the rebuilding of this line here, which is the Douglas branch of the Blue Line. Blue Line in Chicago goes from O'Hare Airport downtown and then goes back out and serves the west side of the city in 2 branches. And this branch here is, again, 100 years old, over 100 years old. It has to be completely rebuilt. And so you can take a look at that and zoom into various stations. Or another line that's about to be rebuilt is the Brown Line up on the north side. And again, we're going to have major capital investment there. We can take a closer look at that. And this is where these kinds of tools come in handy. So you can zoom into a specific segment, specific location. And here's where the ortho photos can be helpful too, which allow you to dive down in closer, take a closer look at, again, the built environment in there. This was done by University of Illinois students, again, who are working with us, and now our own staff do it. Some of those students are actually on our staff now. And then you can take a closer look inside the station itself and see, yes, this would not really work very well in terms of accessibility. Or go up to the platform and see it from that perspective. So it's very helpful in getting a handle on the again, the capital construction issues there. And you can also look at segments. We have the entire rail system has been filmed. Let me zoom in closer. So we have video of the whole rail system. It's not GPS logged. I mean, there were a couple ways to do it. One way is to photo log it and have GPS so you have the lat-long coordinates of every location here. But, you know, I know that this segment is between Damon and Western on the Brown line, so instead we'll just put the camera in the front of the train, film it, very low-cost way, turn it into a QuickTime movie, link it to Acrobat, and you're happening. You know, and that's a very useful tool, again, to have. And then linking these things together with planning studies. So when you get into the physical planning aspects, such as the urban context of that location, so you can see the pedestrian study at that location, or you can look at the 3D rendering of the proposed station at that location, or you can look at a plan view of the station itself. So there's different things like that. This, I don't want to minimize the value of this in various meetings. Not only meetings with the public, and clearly we have some degree of public outreach, which is variable as you look across the country and across the world. You have variable levels of public outreach. But also there are a lot of intra-agency and interagency meetings that you need to have where you're talking about this stuff. And a lot of meetings with elected officials where this kind of conversation can be tremendously augmented with this kind of information. By the way, because not a lot of you are from Chicago, it's worth showing one or two items here, just in case there's any question about, you know, the what we have. If you ever visit Chicago, it's worth coming downtown on the L. You can see here, you cross over a double-deck bridge. It's hard to see that there's two decks to this, and you see the other trains here. There's a lot of operation here. Here's a Grand Junction elevated, again, one floor above the streets. And if we go to another part of the loop, you can see, again, another location here where you just get a sense of the amount of service that's out there. Here you see a train coming in through this junction here, and then you're waiting a few minutes while another train goes by, and then the switch throws, and then you come take a left-hand turn into another part of the loop. So there's a lot of traffic flow, if you will, that you're dealing with also on the elevated lines in Chicago. And as you can see, a very high level of service on our rapid transit lines as well. So there's a lot going on there. Okay. Anyway, those are some vivid examples of what I would call kind of navigational aids, getting you a sense of what a place is like from different dimensions, different levels. They're not necessarily a new idea either. Again, going to an old example. In this case, we're going to go to about something like 14 or 15 years ago. City of St. Louis, I was doing some work for them when I was a grad student. And when we tried to use this technology, we couldn't use it as seamlessly as we do now. Instead, you were using TV monitors because you didn't have video projectors. You were using laser disc players that were connected by analog cable to a computer. So the computer would tell the laser disc player, or serial cable. So you know, the computer would tell the laser disc player, go to this address, and it would flash up on the screen. So we've come a long way from, in the old days, just controlling from a PC or a Macintosh a laser disc player to QuickTime digital video linked to Acrobat. So it's become a lot more seamless, a lot less cumbersome, and that's been an approach. And also, again, it's not necessarily a new technology. You've had panoramic photos for a long, long time. 100 years ago, people were doing panoramic photos, as we can see here. The only difference is, in this case, this came from Library of Congress website, but what we did was we used some of that QuickTime digital video software to run some software on it to enable you to actually navigate within the image. And finally, again, 100 years ago, people were putting cameras on the fronts of trains, so that's not necessarily a new idea either. In fact, the American Mutoscope Company was doing that with the opening of the New York subway in 1904. So what goes around comes around with these technologies. Okay. Oh, yes, and next time somebody says, hey, I got this cool virtual reality thing for you to see, just go to your local antique shop and pick up one of these cards and a stereoscopic viewer, and you can see a little bit of 100-year-old virtual reality. And if you animate between the left and the right frame, you can kind of get a sense of 3D, too. So if you ever wondered what it was like to be in New York at the turn of the century on the elevated during an earthquake, now you know. Anyway, okay, so those are navigational aids. All right, representational aids. That's the last kind of big picture concept I'm going to show you. And then I'll talk very briefly to some of the plans that we're currently undertaking in Chicago, and then we'll open it up for conversation. Representational aids are designed to link concrete representations, such as video or sound clips, to abstract concepts, such as noise. So in this case, you're looking at the noise footprint of a Harley-Davidson motorcycle moving through Quincy, Massachusetts. That was Nicholas Ferran, one of my former master's students, who's now back in his native France, did that. Other examples of representational aids include this one. This was one of my old demos. I showed you Rantoul, Illinois earlier. This was an old Macintosh demo, which we can't unfortunately show you right now, but you could point to different locations on the map and hear aircraft taking off at different decibel levels. You could see noise contours drawn on the map. You could see how many people are likely to be annoyed based on a certain contour and so forth. And so that's another example. Where we've revisited the noise issue is with the L in Chicago. The L is noisy in Chicago. And so here, actually, before I came to the CTA officially, I was still, I had a group of students at the university do this little noise study, and I'm not going to go through the whole lecture. That's a whole nother lecture, noise on the L. Thomas Edison even looked into noise on elevated railroads, and he had trouble making them quieter. But suffice it to say that you can illustrate things with noise, such as the use of different structural materials. So if you listen to an L structure at 102 decibels, okay, and you use different materials such as a concrete deck, it gets a little quieter, and if you add ballast to that, it gets even quieter, and that's all calibrated. So that's an example of where if you calibrate and have comparable examples, it can be a very useful educational tool. Another example deals with the use of noise dampening wheel rings. So if you would have hit a wheel with a hammer 10 years ago, that's what you would have heard. But instead, by installing this $12 noise ring, this is the result. Okay? And that makes the trains quieter on the curves. So you move from something like this to something like this, also with the help of some lubricated rail. So anyway, those are examples of representational aids. All right. And you can look at differences such as noise footprints and so forth like that. And just in case you're into other modes of transportation, a few years ago, back in 1999, I was working on another type of representation for automobile traffic levels of service, where you had a little Java applet that showed more or fewer cars on the road, depending on what level of service you were pointing to. And you could see examples of that level of service represented both graphically with sound and qualitatively with description and quantitatively. So the point there is multiple representations are a good thing because people think about things in many different ways. Okay. And just in case you think this is a new thing, let's look at this video clip from 1932.
Here is Professor Martin, a young scientist from Tate School of Applied Science in Cleveland. Someone told him that the trolley coach was the quietest vehicle on the street, so he's checking up on them with this sensitive noise meter. He also measures the sound made by other public vehicles and private automobiles.
So that's just to show you. Again, what goes around comes around there. This is one of the best representational aids. So these things don't necessarily need to be technically sophisticated, okay? One of the best ones is an example from London Transport that shows how many cars carry how many people who could all be on one bus. All right? This is a tremendous educational tool, again, for policymakers, and very useful. There's a similar analogy to that from a 1950s film that was made in the United States.
To carry 50 seated persons, it would require 29 automobiles. These automobiles would fill a full city block. Yet these 50 people could all ride in one public transit vehicle.
Unfortunately, that film didn't get a lot of airplay in the late 1950s, but nevertheless, that gives you a sense of, again, a useful representational aid. I use this now when I meet with folks. You know, what do you see here? Well, this is in downtown Chicago. I see a parking garage with about, maybe 3,000 spaces. What other people see is a full city block of land use that's dedicated to the automobile. What still other people see, what I would see, are 3 of my trains. 3 trains can carry 3,000 people. Each train can carry 1,000 people. If I'm running trains, as we do, at a 5-minute headway, that's 15 minutes of service at this little station over here that can accommodate this whole thing. So using that, you can really help. It can really help to educate folks. Oh, and this is useful too. We're completely rebuilding this L line I was talking about, right? And people say, well, why does it close on the weekends while you're rebuilding it? Well, that's because last time we rebuilt an L line, we closed the whole line down for 2 years and then reopened it. And guess what? When it reopened, the customers weren't there. It took them a long time to come back because they found other ways to get to work. Well, here we just close this down on the weekends. And so what you see here is Friday night to Sunday, midday, what we do. We basically take out an entire segment of elevated structure and completely rebuilding that. And that's the way we're redoing that entire line without closing it on weekdays. We're keeping it open on the weekdays. We're just closing it on the weekends to be able to accommodate our customers and still be able to provide the service and renew the infrastructure. So that's another example of one of these tools. There you go. Okay. Anyway, so what's the strategy? What's the future strategy for planning at the Transit Authority? Well, in the short term, we're doing things like we're undertaking a schedule efficiency review, which is a nice way of saying that, traffic patterns have changed over the last 30 years, but some of our bus schedules haven't. And so we're trying to rewrite the schedules to better match traffic patterns and doing that systematically. We have a service change committee that looks at the city and says, well, gee, why does the bus stop here when you've got the new shopping center a few miles down the road, or not even a few miles, sometimes a half mile down the road? Why not extend that? And so we look at that system-wide. We're also balancing service standards with budget and revenue. That's one thing that you're often times trying to do in the transit industry. We're also doing medium-term things. We're working to make our bus routes more competitive. Simple things like, for instance, express bus service to the downtown area used to, on the south side of the city, be consolidated, and still is, along one street. So anybody who wanted to get downtown fast on the bus had to take a connecting bus to get to this street to get downtown. Instead, we're doing things like spreading that out into collector zones, which is where all these other express buses will serve. So more people have that one-seat ride downtown. So sometimes there's simple things you can do to improve service and make these routes more competitive. That's very important. We're also working with the city to get signal priority in place. We're not as far advanced as you are here. And we're working on zoning issues in Chicago right now because we know how important that is to our ridership, as you see here with your experience. And finally, in the long term, we've been looking into bus rapid transit for major corridors. We're also, we have some new rail lines that we're proposing and rail extensions. The most notable new rail line is a Circle line that's proposed for Chicago. I won't go into it in a great amount of detail, but suffice it to say that a lot of the conversations publicly have been around extending our system further afield, and more recently we've been paying attention to issues that can increase our core capacity and ways to increase our core capacity, and the Circle line is one of those ways to really link all of our lines with the commuter rail lines. And so that's one of the things we're doing. And we use multimedia too, such as the technologies you've been looking at, to enable us to get a better handle on that. And so that allows us to go in, again, look more closely at a proposed area, at proposed stations, at the environment around these proposed stations and that kind of thing. And so that's where we, again, use this technology to really help us have conversations about areas of the city. So that's another example of one of these long-term strategies that we have. In terms of the future of this technology overall, A lot of innovation still has to take place in a variety of environments, and the university environment is very important for that. And so this kind of environment, of course, is one where you have the opportunity to reflect, to think outside of the box, and I encourage you to do so while you're here, because oftentimes when you get into practice, you're so busy doing one thing to another that it's hard to be able to do that. And so maintaining that connection between innovation and implementation, which is where really internship programs come into play in some respects, is very important. And only in that way can you really understand the impact of these technologies. Thanks very much. We have time for a few questions, I guess. Sorry, blathered on for a while there.
Please remember to use the microphone.
Yes.
When you ask the question.
Okay. Yes.
You said that you used a flat fare instead of a tiered fare, and I was wondering if that fare is also cross-modal. So, like, if you're on a train, kind of like a fast pass in the
Yes.
for all systems.
There's a couple of ways it's handled. First of all, the flat fare, right now, the fare is the same on bus or on rail. There's there's a $1.50 base fare, okay, which you pay, and then 30 cents for a transfer. So that can be a bus-to-bus, bus-to-rail transfer. So basically, most people incur at least one transfer. So the typical cash fare is $1.80. Wherever you're going to or from in our service area, that is in the city limits or the close-in 40 suburbs. That said, we also have a pass program where you can get a monthly pass for a certain flat amount, or a weekly pass, or a daily pass. Those again are flat. So it is flat, both bus and rail. We don't currently charge differently, except on some shuttle buses which just run downtown.
Can I follow up with
Mm-hmm.
I was just curious, with using these passes, do you ever foresee at some point where they could be used to collect data on where routes are? So say, like when you're on the web and surfing, there are cookies that say where you've been, that sort of thing. Is there any way to have some sort of anonymous accounting for somebody who has a monthly pass?
Yes. We've been moving towards smart cards in Chicago. I don't think you have them here yet, do you? We have smart cards that basically are proximity cards. We've had several different fare technologies. Initially, of course, just the cash fare box. Then we went to magnetic cards, which you can dip in either a fare box or in the turnstile to get on the train. We don't have proof of payment like you have here. So that is, anytime you're getting on the train, you go through a turnstile, you dip a magnetic card, and it deducts an amount of money off of the stored value card. Or if you have a pass card, then it lets you in, basically. That data, that card number is collected. That card number, especially the magnetic cards, are not associated with your name. So it's anonymous information. And you can track the number of where somebody got on in the morning and where they got on in the afternoon, and from that kind of determine what the linked trip was. And so we have some crude ways of collecting that. We'll have a more sophisticated way when smart cards are more widely adopted, and they're currently being rolled out more aggressively now. Now, smart cards are proximity cards, so they're faster in terms of getting on board the train or bus. You just basically get the card near the fare box, and it lets you in. It retains, again, the information. You do have name and address information, but you strip that out if you're doing travel planning information. But the name and address information is important from the customer standpoint, because one thing you can do with smart cards is you can make them void if somebody loses them. That is, somebody can call us. If you have, say, $75 on your smart card and then you lose it, you can call us up and get refunded for that, get a new smart card with that money, and we can void the one that was lost. And so that's a useful thing. Obviously, you also want to, take care to avoid privacy, to accommodate privacy issues and so forth. And so that's something that you're always mindful of as well.
Could you elaborate a little on how you take this technology out when you're doing your public outreach? Do you just have a lot of laptops, or how well does it play out when you're talking to the public?
It plays out reasonably well. It depends on the venue, really. I find that this technology works the best when we're dealing with a limited set of community leaders. That is, you might have about 5 or 10 real stakeholders in the room when you're playing out a charrette. For example, a few months ago, we did something where there were some people from a community who were deeply concerned about improved bus service. And there's a variety of reasons why you want to pay attention to that, but in a measured sort of way, especially dealing with a city as big as Chicago. But in this case, you sit down, we projected the map on the wall, we zoomed into the area of concern, we highlighted areas where they said there were new major traffic generators, we went out, we did our due diligence, we checked those out, and from that we proposed some new lines, which actually ended up getting put into effect. So to that extent, the technology was useful. We don't necessarily use the full-blown multimedia technology when we have a larger public meeting, such as a group maybe this size or bigger. In those kinds of cases, it's usually by the time you get to those larger groups, you're further down in the process and more in the mode towards doing a presentation. So for example, we completely restructured the service in Evanston, which is one of the largest, closest in suburbs to Chicago. And so we dealt with some smaller groups with this more interactive technology. And then when we went to the public hearing in the city council, we had a more passive technology that was more PowerPoint based, but still very useful in illustrating the tools. And then we took feedback from that, some significant feedback, and adjusted accordingly and came back, and eventually the proposal passed, but not without some iterations.
Have you used anything to get the real-time feedback, implement real-time feedback from the people at the meeting? So, they say, move this over here, and what would happen? Is that
again, that kind of thing works better in the smaller groups where you might have 10 or 15 people, but with the bigger groups it becomes a little unwieldy. So it really depends on how big the group is and how that plays out. In the cases where you do have those groups, though, then usually you have somebody at the front of the room with the mouse following the conversation. Often that's me, but sometimes it'll be one of my staff who'll be there, who will follow along. Yes.
I was curious, with all the work that goes into doing that kind of multimedia and comprehensive presentation, how much you're collaborating with, say, like planning departments and whatnot in the greater Chicago area to kind of share these representations and do this sort of work, and also what connection you have to any regional planning. I'm sure MPO connections, but how plugged in? You say you're looking at zoning processes, but like how plugged in you are to kind of establishing a regional vision for the greater Chicago area too.
Well, a lot of our data actually has come from some of our sister agencies. We work very closely with the Chicago Department of Transportation, for instance. We also work very closely with the Chicago Department of Planning and Development. So, for example, the aerial photos, all the ortho photos you saw came from the City of Chicago's Planning and Development Division. And on the other side of the coin, to the extent that they want to borrow or use our maps, we're happy to make them available. So there is an amount of sharing back and forth. With respect to regional issues in Chicago, that's actually an interesting and contentious issue in the region, because you have about 294 different municipalities in the Chicago metro region. And for a long time, as long as I've been around, not only recently but just in my lifetime, they've just been puzzling over a way to get those 294 municipalities to really come together with a single vision, and it's been a challenging process and project, to say the least. Nevertheless, you have a couple of groups, like you have a Northeastern Illinois Planning Commission, which has undertaken a very forward-thinking community visioning process where they've gone in with similar technologies and used kind of electronic voting and so forth to get everybody to say, okay, we all believe that transportation is a critical issue for the region, and we all believe in smart growth and all that. That's fine, but after that it breaks down as to how to get there. That's where you have 294 different ideas, because none of these municipalities really wants to give up their planning authority, and so it's a real political challenge in the Chicago region. That said, there are some municipal and civic groups, such as a group called Metropolis 2020, which is sponsored by the Commercial Club of Chicago, which sponsored the initial Burnham Plan of Chicago. And they've come up with a vision for the region. We work with them, and we work with others with the long-term visions as well. Our MPO is kind of a different animal. They're an animal of the state. And we work with them as we advance projects for the future as well. But some MPOs take a more hands-on and aggressive approach. Some MPOs in the country are stronger than others. Clearly, I won't say where Chicago stands on that.
And is CTA then involved with the things you're mentioning with Northeast Illinois Commission? I mean, is CTA always kind of sitting at the table as well when these kind of
we sit at the
on?
table when we feel that there's a good reason for us to be there. There are some. It's funny because there's so many regions, so many groups, so many subgroups. You've got a Chicago Central Area Committee. You've got the Northeastern Illinois Planning Commission. You've got all these groups. If my staff went to every one of them, then we wouldn't have anybody around. So we do look at them. But when there are issues that are germane to transportation, we're always invited, and we're always very careful to be at the table. Yes.
How do you decide if fixing an aging facility is worth fixing when the population demographics change the amount that a facility is used?
Well, there's a chicken and the egg argument, and that's kind of a traditional one there. I think with respect to reinvesting in a community, there's a couple of issues that are worth mentioning. One is, you have a facility such as a rapid transit line that has fallen into disrepair. And perhaps as a result of the disrepair, ridership has dropped off because the trains aren't running very fast anymore because they have to run slow over the old infrastructure. So it turns into a negative spiral. And furthermore, that could also lead to some disinvestment in the community around the stations, and sometimes that has happened over time. There's a view, especially one that's in Chicago, that by reinvesting and rebuilding some of that infrastructure, you can catalyze reinvestment in some of the inner cities of the area. And I feel both with my academic hat on and with my transit authority hat on, that reinvesting in the inner city, especially in some of that inner city infrastructure, is good because you want to take advantage of that existing infrastructure, make it more viable to spur further development in the city rather than out in the sprawling suburban areas. And in fact, there are some very significant issues with sprawl because, again, we don't have the urban growth boundary that you folks have. And so really it becomes an issue of, do you invest in the inner city and that infrastructure? Because it's hard to create completely new infrastructure. That is, it's with respect to these rail lines, you have the right-of-way already. One of the most expensive things to get when you're building a new line is really the right-of-way, the land that you need to operate that line. And so once you have that, and you have that in your public realm, you want to take advantage of that and leverage that to spur further development. So in my sense, it is a good investment to reinvest in that infrastructure. And oftentimes, as we've seen, at least in the Chicago experience, that when the infrastructure improves, a lot of times you see redevelopment in the neighborhood. You can say the neighborhood spurs reinvestment in infrastructure and vice versa. So I think it goes both ways.
We take email questions, so we have a couple that have come in by email, and I'm not going to vouch for the seriousness of this question, or these questions, but the first one is, do CTA administrators ride CTA regularly? And the second one is, has the portrayal of the L on ER made an impact on how Chicagoans use the L?
Yes, most administrators, I would say, ride regularly. I can't vouch for the riding habits of all of my colleagues. I can say that I ride every day, and that's because I feel it's very important to my job function. And some of my colleagues may ride more than others. It really depends on their function. I mean, we have some people who are dealing purely with real estate matters around the city, and they may need to drive from one point or another to function, and sometimes I need to drive as well if I need to get to a meeting further afield. But actually, the president of the Transit Authority, Frank Cruzy, made it very clear that ridership, and especially employing ridership and management ridership, was a very important top priority, so he's often seen on the system as well, and that's very clear. I don't know if it's made an appreciable impact on our ridership. It certainly doesn't hurt to have a positive portrayal of transportation, and I should say that, you know, one thing that we have done is worked hard to address negative portrayals of transportation. We've seen those in the media crop up from time to time, and we work very hard to object soundly to some of those. Sometimes there's an automobile manufacturer, for instance, who will come out with an advert that will knock transit in one way or another, and we're always very vocal in objecting to that sort of thing. But yeah, it never hurts to have the system envisioned by various folks.
A couple questions regarding a lot of this fun technology stuff you've been showing us. And first of all, from a sort of staffing standpoint, it sounds like you've had a lot of students that come in and contribute things, and your staff develops things. And I'm wondering how big of an issue or staffing issue is it to keep this stuff updated and maintained, et cetera? And then secondly, if you've tried to put any of this stuff on the web for either, I could see for marketing purposes or also for planning to get inputs, like on your getting rid of some of the bus stops, for example, I could see putting stuff up on the web to get input from the public, something like that.
Well, maintaining the database and the information base is always clearly an important issue. And I think part and parcel of that is having a human infrastructure in place to be able to do that, having that human capital there, which is why I created that group, the Data Services Group, to make sure that there are people who will take on the stewardship, if you will, of that information base. The visual information base, you know, the rail system, we film and we refilm as it changes. So you're not going out every month and filming it. Instead, if there's significant capital changes to it, you'll go back and you'll film a segment or another segment. In terms of the videos at various locations, various neighborhoods in the city, or various turnarounds on our system, we strategically do that. You can't go out and blanketly cover the entire system. It just wouldn't, it would be so costly, it would be hard to do. So instead, we anticipate where the areas that there are going to be concerns. So, for example, we have 4 bus turnarounds on the west side of the city that some groups are concerned about. So we film those turnarounds and we have them available for the series of meetings we might have concerning those turnarounds. And so the point is, strategically targeting where we do our multimedia collection is very important. And so that's part of the way we're able to manage the stewardship of that. And it's also very important to set priorities. One of our priorities right now is just the base data collection, something they're doing very well here at TriMet, which is collecting the data through on-vehicle data collection devices, and we're working very hard to put that infrastructure into place. But in the meantime, we're taking advantage of what we have access to. With respect to the web-based planning, we haven't done an awful lot of that yet. I used to be a very big advocate of that back at my old institutions and so forth. I thought it was neat. I had my students experiment with that. I think we have to look at the cultures of our constituencies, and by and large, a large part of our constituency still deals with the traditional meeting format. That's not to say it's not going to shift to the web, and it certainly will, but in the meantime, we're going where the investment really takes us initially, and we see follow-on investment moving in that direction as we move forward. We do use the web for our intranet communications, as I mentioned, with the capital construction projects and so forth. But with respect to the public feedback, we're still working with some of the traditional methods.
Does Chicago give buses priority over autos in a lot of places or any place?
I mean traffic signals?
Well, in here you have to yield to a bus, and they have bus-only streets, number one.
Yeah. We're working to move in that direction more aggressively. I mean, from the technology standpoint, bus signal priority is important to us, and we're working with the city to put that into place. And we have some experimental segments that we're looking forward to. There's still some technological infrastructure that has to be put into place for that to start happening. And then some policy choices also have to be made. With respect to priority in terms of bus lanes, we do have those. Unfortunately, there's an enforcement issue with a lot of our bus lanes. There's a lot of deliveries that take place in those bus lanes, and they're not working as effectively as we can. One of the things we're experimenting with is an idea that we glommed on from London, which is putting a camera on the front of the bus to take a picture of the license plate of the offending vehicle so they get mailed a ticket. And that's being looked into very carefully by the city and the CTA. The police department, when there's special events, clearly give priority to buses and so forth. But again, we can always use more help in that respect.
I'd like to hear more about your work with bus rapid transit, specifically how elaborate that system would be or is, and how it compares with land use development in the vicinity of the stations, and how well it compares with ridership choice between rail and bus rapid transit.
Well, I think I'm not going to go into the whole talk on bus rapid transit, but let me just show you something here that gives you a sense of what our approach is. In a sense, if we go past the fact that, yeah, bus rapid transit gives you the flexibility of the bus combined with the benefits of dedicated right-of-way of light rail, right? Okay, a lot of us have heard that. And Chicago has a rich history of bus rapid transit proposals, as we can see here from the 1950s. This one's not Chicago here, though. But the interesting thing is, from our perspective, it's not an all-or-nothing proposition. That is, we see it as steps towards achieving bus rapid transit, and we're working more aggressively on some of these steps in the short term than others. So, for example, we've already instituted several neighborhood-to-neighborhood major corridor limited stop services where the buses stop every half mile, and you have an every half mile limited stop service overlaid onto an existing local service. That type of limited stop service, not unlike the Wilshire and Ventura Boulevard corridors, for instance, in Los Angeles, has worked very effectively. In fact, in some of our corridors, we've seen a 17% ridership growth just with that limited stop service, and that does not come at the expense of parallel corridors, so that's a good thing. We're also working to move more of our stops to the far side of an intersection so that you don't get caught behind a red light after that last person boards, and that works actually well with some of the limited stop services, so that improves service along those corridors. As I mentioned, we're working hard to get signal priority into place. Some of the other characteristics of bus rapid transit, such as queue jumping, we probably won't be too aggressive on because there's not a lot of places where we can do that and have it work effectively. On the other hand, there are some locations where we're looking very carefully at dedicated right-of-way, some abandoned rail lines, as well as some streets. We're experimenting with more off-vehicle fare collection with the smart cards is primarily the way we're doing that. And we'll probably be experimenting with branding. So I would have to say that in terms of our bus rapid transit proposals, we really see it more as an evolution of taking some of our existing routes and making them more efficient than creating an entirely new route that would otherwise be light rail or some other mode. That's what I mean by bus rapid transit. Other questions? Yes?
Can you say again what are the equipment and software requirements for creating the videos and panoramic pictures? And also you mentioned linking those pictures up with GPS. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, a couple things. First of all, the software requirements. Oops, that's not it. There we go. This is the software that we used for some of these panos and the base maps and so forth that you saw. In a sense, the very basic level, you have PowerPoint and you have Adobe Acrobat, the full version of Adobe Acrobat. $250 roughly is what Acrobat costs, I think, these days. In addition to that, we have Apple QuickTime Pro for the digital video, and we have some generic virtual reality authoring tools. I wouldn't call them virtual reality because it's not true virtual reality, but what it does is enables you to stitch together images into panoramic images. So if you look on the web and do a search for VR Works or VR or panoramic photos, I think you can find some software that's $300 or less, generally speaking, and that's the software that allows you to stitch these images together and link them to one another. That gives you a sense of that. The locational registration, if you will, of the specific images themselves is not something that we're doing, because that ratchets up the technology a very significant notch. It's something we'll probably see in the near future. I mean, right now we already have the cell phones that allow you to snap digital images. Soon, and in some areas of the world, those cell phones already have GPS built into them. And as you link the GPS with the images, that's clearly going to be something on the horizon. But rather than being, kind of on the forefront of that, we'd rather see that technology mature, and then we'll take advantage of that. Traditionally, in the transportation industry, you've had video logging trucks, if you will, that will go down a street with images, cameras, and link those images via GPS to a geographic database, a spatial database. They've also used those in the railroad industry. Those tend to be very expensive systems compared to this approach. And this is fine from our perspective, because if somebody tells me what intersection I'm at, I know where in the city I'm at. And the exact location down to less than 10 feet is not so important to us as knowing where in the city these are located from a planning perspective. Any other questions? Okay, well, if not, thank you all very much.
Just a reminder, next week, Professor Mike Walton from the University of Texas will be here to talk about the next 10 years of program planning for intelligent transportation systems. Thank you.
There's some maps I left up at the front, but when they're gone, they're gone.